Page 3 now. The farce of global warming. Scientists advocating for climate change claim sea levels are rising to dangerous levels. The Union of Concerned Scientists has compiled a list showing dozens of U.S. cities that could be underwater, some in as little as 20 years. However, not everyone is buying into the scare. The mayor of an island disappearing in the Chesapeake Bay recently went up against the face of global warming, and that would be former Vice President Al Gore.
And I've been working in the Chesapeake Bay for 50 plus years. And I have a crab house business out on the water. And the water level is the same as it was when the place was built in 1970. I'm not a scientist, but I'm a keen observer. And if sea level rise is occurring, why am I not seeing signs of it? I mean, our island is disappearing, but it's because of erosion and not sea level rise. And unless we get a seawall, we will lose our island. But back to the question, why am I not seeing signs of the sea level rise?
What do you think the erosion is due to, Mayor?
Wave action, storms.
Has that increased any?
Not really. I mean,
so you're losing the island even though the waves haven't increased?
Yes, this erosion has been going on since Captain John Smith discovered the island and named it.
Yeah,
and
well,
it's gotten to our doorstep now, and we focus on it more.
Well, arguments about science aren't necessarily going to be of any comfort to you, and I'm sorry for what you're going through and your neighbors on Tangier Island. I read about you in the paper. There was an article in the Washington Post, I believe, after President Trump called you up, and won't necessarily do you any good for me to tell you that the scientists do say that the sea level is rising in the Chesapeake Bay and that you've lost about 2/3 of your island already over a longer period of time, and that the forecast for the future is another 2 feet of sea level. What would if there was another 2 feet of sea level rise, what would that mean for Tangier Island?
Tangier Island, our elevation is only about 4 foot above sea level.
Yeah.
And if I see sea level rise occurring, I'll shout it from the housetop.
Okay.
I mean, we don't have, the land to give up, but I'm just not seeing it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one of the challenges of this issue is taking what the scientists say and translating it into terms that are believable to people, where they can see the consequences in their own lives. And I get that, and I try every day to figure out ways to do that.
So, what is the truth on so-called climate change? Are we in danger of widespread flooding, or is this just the latest chapter in the global warming scam? Joining me now from Las Vegas, Nevada, meteorologist and co-founder of the Weather Channel and outspoken critic of global warming, John Coleman. John, you gotta love the blatant hypocrisy. We have Al Gore flying around the world promoting his new documentary on global warming, yet, when he talks about people, creating, pollution and all these things, he's, one of the biggest guys doing it. I mean, he does it probably 20 million more times than I do.
Well, he produces a lot of CO2, but that's no big deal. A few points. First of all, Ms. Hamill, it's great to be on One America News, where there's almost no fake news, except the piece you just ran was totally fake news. The so-called Union of Concerned Scientists is one of the phonier organizations in existence. I have a friend who actually signed up his dog as a member of the Union of Concerned Scientists, and they accepted it. Gives you an idea of how that organization works.
No way.
Now, as for, yeah, that's true. And as for this thing about Chesapeake Bay, why did Al Gore go there? Well, here's why. The most unsettled piece of coastline of the United States of America is Chesapeake Bay. Why is that? It's because long after our country was formed and the whole thing was settled down, a bolide, you know what that is? It's a super bright asteroid, and it came crashing into the U.S. and created Chesapeake Bay. So it's a recent creation just a few thousand years ago, and that is still settling. And that island sitting out in the middle of the bay, but beneath it The whole bottom of the bay is still settling. And as civilization moved in, they went in and dredged the bay, and they pumped tons of mud in the swamplands along the bay to raise it up so they could build houses. And that's compacting. So that's unstable. So wait a minute. Despite all of that, the sea level gauges show, get this, Chesapeake Bay is rising no more significantly than any other part of the world, and the rest of it is rising almost totally insignificant.
So what you're saying is Al Gore is wrong on this one then. And, I want to point out, the Earth has warmed and cooled in history, and also, the sea level has gone up, it's gone down. And there's new evidence and scientific data from NASA that says actually the sea level is actually falling, not rising.
Well, the sea level is probably just at this point rising a little bit. Over the last few thousand years, it has been rising at an average of about 7 inches every 100 years. That is no crisis. That is no problem. And that is just as natural as can be, and has nothing to do with the activities of mankind. That's where Al Gore goes nuts. He blames our civilization for creating climate change and a coming catastrophe. And it is the biggest piece of fake news that you put on the air today.
Well, and you would expect for there to be changes to our environment. If you look back in history, I don't know if this is fake news or real news, but I've seen those documentaries of the lost cities that are underwater, and obviously they're underwater now. So I would imagine that we can expect that there will be changes to the terrain in our environment.
Well, the longest record we have goes back to some ice cores, which were dug out of the ice at Antarctica to show what the climate had been. And the scientists who did that came up with a chart, and it shows that we have these giant ice ages when the whole Earth turns into an ice ball. And then we have the interglacial periods of the warm spells where civilization prospers and life is good. And they vacillate back and forth. And it's pretty clear that has to do with the activities of the sun. And in fact, a group of Japanese scientists just released a report in which they said that we're starting toward the next ice age, that this warm spell is coming to an end. Gosh, I hope they're wrong. But our science is so great today that if that begins to happen, we will cope with it very well.
And we have to move on to this. There's a bunch of cities across the U.S., actually hundreds of them. They're trying to resist Trump in a sense that they're doing this by upholding the Paris Climate Agreement that Trump pulled out of. I mean, what's your reaction to this? Is this going to make a difference?
Oh, yeah, it makes a difference for the people who live in this country because if they have their way, it's going to cost the average American family about $4,000 a year. And that may not sound like a lot of money, but that's maybe what it costs to have pads and iPhones for the youngsters, what it costs to go on vacation, what it costs for health care, what it costs for a summer camp for the kids. I mean, it's a lot of our college fund. It's a lot of money. That's one thing. Another thing is that what these mayors are doing is reacting to environmental concerns. They have been told that so-called climate change is impacting our environment. Well, I'm the biggest environmentalist on the face of the earth. We're just this little blue marble, and we got to protect our environment. Well, our scientists and our engineers, not our government, have done wonders in my lifetime to make this planet much better as we burn fossil fuels. They have produced everything that's cleaned up the function of automobiles, everything that's cleaned up power plants and factories. And so now we're producing almost no pollution as we burn fossil fuels. The only thing we are producing is carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is essential to growth on Earth. The Earth is 20% greener than it used to be because of the increased carbon dioxide that we have created.
Yeah, and so, Trump did this for a reason, which is what you were pointing out, is that the Paris Climate Accord was just a horrible deal for the U.S. while everyone else was going to benefit from it, specifically China. And this was just another huge tax for Americans. I mean, we're already taxed to death, and it was going to have very little impact actually on the environment and, going green. And when you say you're an environmentalist, I am too. And a lot of people will say, oh, well, conservatives are people who don't support the Paris Climate Accord. Well, they're not environmentalists. They don't care. I mean, I've been going green for as long as I can imagine. And I do believe that people need to do the best that they can to reduce their waste, recycle, take care of the planet. But we also have to have this balance between business and, and our economy and all these things that people need. It's not like people are going to go back to living in a teepee and producing, no pollution. People love their iPhones and they like, buying things from the grocery store that come from plastic. All those things create pollution in a sense. And I just want to ask you a quick question. Has Al Gore ever reached out to you? It looks like, he could use a little information since he's so wrong.
As a former vice president, he's protected. And he's a great politician. But Al Gore created this huge $20 billion a year global warming climate change industry for which he has profited mightily. And those around him have also profited. And does Al Gore reach out to me? Are you kidding? He hates me. He has said that skeptics, he calls us skeptics, such as me, scientists who have studied this carefully and strongly. And if I thought there was any threat to climate change, I'd jump aboard the train. He calls us deniers, which is an insulting term. And he says we should all be jailed or killed. I mean, he's vicious. It reminds me of when young kids got in an argument back in grade school. And the one who had no facts behind his side of the argument and had been proven wrong would start yelling to the other person, you're a liar, you're a cheater, you're SOB, call names. And that's kind of how Gore is treating me, because he's wrong, dead wrong. He won't debate. He won't have any contact with me. When we were in the same city, he had guards outside of the TV station I was to make sure I didn't come out and try to get to him.
Yeah,
He does not want to meet me.
And this just shows how close-minded these people are who are pushing the global warming scam. And I'll be sure to get this link online and I'll tag Al Gore in it. Maybe he'll watch it and learn something. Thank you so much. Coming up next, Stop the Tape, deciphering the Democrat Party's new, better, and raw deal. Also ahead, Orthodox rabbis calling for Homeland Security